what compelled the transition to agriculture was the religious beliefs of the people at that time, okay? So it was humanity's religious impulse that drove our transition into agriculture. What I will show you today, okay, my argument to you today is that this religious impulse, this need for religion, this need to understand why we are here today and what we must be doing and where we're going, it's always been there, okay? In fact, religion is what makes us fundamentally human. And to prove this case, I'm going to talk about Ice Age cave paintings. So I asked you to look at these cave paintings that we found all around the world, okay, that go back 30,000, 40,000 years. And as you can see from those pictures, they're beautiful, right? And they're extremely creative, artistic. And so I want to look at 3 questions about the cave paintings today. First of all, how were they painted? They didn't have the technology we have today, so how did they paint these cave paintings? Second question is, why did they do this? Because when you're in a cave, it's very dark, it's very cold, and it's very hard to breathe. But they spend days in there painting them. So why did they do that? Okay, that's the second question. The third question is, and the hardest question is, what do these cave paintings represent, or what do they mean? So the first caveat, the first thing I want you to be aware of is that there's absolutely no agreement on any of these questions. Cave paintings is something that we have a lot of around the world, but there's very little evidence as to what they are, what they represent, and how they were painted. So there are a lot of guesses, okay? And the case that I will present to you today is my own personal interpretation based on my research and my understanding of the evidence. But please be aware that there are many different interpretations, and the evidence is extremely unclear about many of these things, okay? So let's start. The first thing you need to understand is that for most of human history, it's been very cold, okay? So the Ice Age only ended about 12,000 years ago, and we've seen a general warming of the planet, which has allowed us to adopt agriculture. But before then, we're basically living on a very cold planet. Now, the history of humanity is this. 300,000 years ago, we came into being in Africa. But because the world became very cold about 100,000 years ago, that meant a scarcity of resources. And that forced us to seek food and resources elsewhere. And so that drove our movement into Europe, which then drove our movement into Asia, and then across the Bering Strait, remember, because this is all ice, right? Into North America and into South America. And then from Asia, we went down to Australia, okay? So we basically colonized the planet. But there weren't that many of us. There was only about 1 million of us all around the world 20,000 years ago. And the other thing to remember is that in this process, there were actually other human beings in other places. So the Neanderthals were here, the Nesovans were here. And we interbred with them until we became the dominant human species, okay? Okay, so does that make sense? All right, so that's the background. Now, let's look at some cave paintings. Because this is in the Chauvet Cave, and this started about 30,000 years ago. So these cave paintings were a continuous process where different people at different times went to the caves and painted different pictures. They might have added more things to the pictures as well, okay? But as you can see, this is clearly representing animals, right? Bisons, rhinoceros. The other thing that's interesting about these paintings is that there's really no focus, okay? You see lions, you see horses, you see rhinos, okay? It's almost like nature is one interconnected picture, okay? These are lions, okay? This is Lacoste Cave about 20,000 years ago, and a very famous artist, Pablo Picasso, actually was invited into one of these caves, and he said that, wow, we learned nothing in 10,000 years, meaning that they were just as good back then as they are today. Artistically speaking, humans have not improved at all, okay? So these are horses, okay? This is Altamira, Spain, which goes back to 34,000 BCE. And you can see that they're not looking for a realistic depiction of animals, okay? They're trying to imagine the natural world in their own way. Okay, so now the question then is, okay, how did they paint these pictures? So first of all, they mainly use red and black. Okay? Red came from ochre, which is a type of clay, and black comes from charcoal. Okay, so that's the coloring they used. Inside a cave, it's very dark, so they had to use lighting. Okay, so what they did was they got some animal fat and put fire on it. Okay, so they could see some of the caves, but not all of them. Okay, and then so now the question is, why did they paint these pictures? And a lot of the clue is this. A lot of the clue is where we found these paintings. And we found these paintings in a very special place in the cave. We found these paintings in the cave, the section of the cave where the acoustics was the best, the sound was the best. So what this means is we're fairly convinced that these paintings were part of a ritual which included music, because we found musical instruments as well, flutes, okay? So in other words, we think that these paintings are like Göbekli Tepe, which is like maybe now and then these hunter-gatherers would come into this cave for a religious festival where there's music, dancing, okay? And they are watching these paintings together. So these paintings are part of a religious festival. In other words, these paintings are not about art. It's really about religion. It's expressing the religious beliefs of the people at that time. Okay? So does this make sense, guys? All right.